Hey, good morning. I'm Matt. I want to tell you a story today about somebody and see if you can guess who they are. This man came from a very wealthy family, and by incredible hard work and genius, he rose in politics. He was already a famous politician when he was just a teenager. In his early 20s, he decided he wanted to get better as a public speaker, so he boarded a ship that was sailing across the Mediterranean to go to a university on the island of Rhodes. But while he was sailing on this ship, it was assaulted by pirates, and they boarded his ship, captured everybody on board, and when they found him, they were delighted. They knew him, he was famous, and they quickly wrote a ransom letter, and they were about to send it off to his family when they let him know how much they were asking for his ransom, $600,000. He laughed and said they didn't know who they were dealing with. They should be asking for more, at least $1.5 million. So they quickly rewrote the ransom letter and sent it off to his family asking for $1.5 million. And then they waited. While this young man was waiting with them, he played games with them, he hung out with them, he practiced his public speeches on them. And he jokingly told them that when the ransom came in and he was freed, he was going to come after them, capture them, and crucify every single one of them. They laughed and punched him in the shoulder. The ransom did come in. This young man was freed. He immediately went back to the mainland, raised more money, raised a private army, hired ships, and went back to the island where the pirates had held him captive. He found them there, still gloating over the 1.5 mil. He quickly overcame them with his armies, captured them along with the ransom they'd taken, brought them back to the mainland, had them tried, and every single one of them crucified. Do you know who I am talking about? I'll give you a hint. He lived in the Roman Empire right around the year 0, and his initials were JC. No, it wasn't Jesus Christ. It was Julius Caesar, one of the greatest military and political geniuses who has ever lived. That little story, a little episode with the pirates, is just one of hundreds in his life where he dominated against all odds. After the pirates, he used his genius and his limitless energy to advance and to advance and advance and crush and crush and crush until he had conquered half of Europe and become dictator of Rome. His most famous quote is Veni, Vidi, Vici. I came, I saw, I conquered. Jesus showed up 50 years after Julius Caesar died, when Julius Caesar was being worshiped as a god. And so probably Jesus had Julius on mind when he said this to his disciples. You know that the rulers in this world lord it over their people, and officials flaunt their authority over those under them, but among you it will be different. What does that mean, to lord it over someone? The Greek word there is a verb. It's katakuriou. And it means to master someone, to best them, to subjugate them. Caesar had katakuriou'd everybody. In every contest, he came out on top. And so for every Roman who wanted to succeed, his life was the template for success. But Jesus said, among you, among my followers in my church, it will not be like that. Rising above the rest will not be your ambition. You will not katakuriou anybody. Jesus was talking about this because 2 of his followers had asked for just that. They wanted to rise above all the rest of his disciples. This is in Mark chapter 10. James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came over and spoke to Jesus. "Teacher," they said, "we want you to do us a favor." "What is your request?" he asked. They replied, "When you sit in your glorious throne, we want to sit in places of honor next to you, one on your right and the other on your left." Honor, power, recognition. Give us those, Jesus. We don't want to end up average. That would be the worst, to be just another one of your disciples. We want to be the best followers. We want to katakuri you, the rest of your followers. My wife's sister has 3 daughters, and the younger ones are 9 and 11. And whenever we go to visit them, we play board games together, like Monopoly or Clue, or this new one called Big Money. The last time we were out there, we played checkers. And as we were setting up the game, I thought to myself, you know what? Uncle Matt has been winning a lot. Maybe it's okay for him to lose this one. I'll just take it easy. My nieces are really nice girls. I want them to remember winning against me some of the time. So we started playing. And we're just a few moves in where I kind of humbly admit, I don't really understand checker strategy very well. And the older niece says, "Oh, well, I know it really well." And instantly I felt rise up inside this, "Oh, really? Okay, well, we're going to find out. I'm totally taking you down." So I start to really focus on my moves, intending to win. And then she double jumped me. I couldn't believe it. I'm 38 years old. I have a master's degree, and I was getting beaten by an 11-year-old girl. I'm like, this girl is smarter than me. I felt very insecure very quickly. She starts kinging up her pieces. My inner world is falling apart. I realized that the only way that I was going to beat her was if I ran emotional interference. So the younger niece is there advising the older one. They're helping each other out, and they make a minor mistake. And so I say, "Ooh, that was some bad advice." And then all of a sudden there's discord between them. Emotions run high. All of a sudden Uncle Matt makes a quadruple jump and wins the game. Booyah, baby. Vini, vidi, vici. I was talking with my brother-in-law, their dad, after the victory, and he said, "You know what? If we took pictures of game time, every time Uncle Matt came over, it would just be tears running down faces and frowns. Is that the legacy that you want, Uncle Matt, in my house? That you katakuri'd my 10-year-old daughters?" We were laughing, but it is so true. Even when I don't want to win, I want to win. There is this competitiveness in me. I need to win, and board games expose that, but the problem is much greater and extends much farther than just board games. Solomon wrote this, "I have seen that all toil and all achievement is the result of rivalry between a man and his neighbor." And maybe he was going a bit far in saying all toil and achievement is the result of rivalry, but either way, he perceived that most of us, especially for men, we are driven by competition, competing for status, competing for wealth, competing for promotions, competing for recognition. We run from the fear of being average. That is like a huge insult in our culture, that you are average, that you are unremarkable. Somebody tells you that your kid is average, you probably want to punch them in the face. Like, how dare you suggest my kid is like other kids? One of my friends said to me recently that most men are motivated by 3 things: gold, girls, and glory. And maybe the writer of Ecclesiastes is right, that in the end, it's all really about glory. It's like, I don't want just gold. I want to get more gold than you. I don't want a hot wife. I want a hotter wife than yours. I want to get to the end of the day of my life and be able to say, I came, I saw, I conquered. I did better than the rest of y'all. Women might not be as motivated by glory, but maybe they compete for some other things like appearances, looking better. than their friends, or having a better family, a bigger family than the people around them. I have this piece of paper that I taped up in my office. It's the top 5 regrets of the dying, taken from a book written by a palliative care nurse named Bronnie Ware. She sat beside the bedsides of hundreds of people who were dying, and she recorded what they said to her, especially the regrets that they had from their life. And she listed them down and categorized them and put up the top 5 regrets of the dying. Guess what is not on that list? I wish I had made more money than my friends. Not on there. I wish I had gotten farther in my career than the people around me. Also not on there. I wish I had kept in better shape and looked better and bought nicer clothes than other people so I look better than them. Not on there. I wish I had made something of myself so others would respect me more. Not on there. What was on there were these ones. I wish I had let myself be happier. I wish I chilled out a little bit on, trying to make something of myself. I wish I had stayed in touch with my friends. The second biggest regret was, I wish I hadn't worked so hard. Bronnie Ware wrote this about that one. This regret came from every male patient that I nursed. They missed their children's youth and their partner's companionship. All of the men I nursed deeply regretted spending so much of their lives on the treadmill of a work existence. Every single man that she treated on his deathbed said, I wish I hadn't I wish I hadn't thrown so much of my life at work and neglected some very much more important things in my life to do so. Maybe we don't think that we're seeking glory, and maybe that's a bit too big of a word for what we're looking for from work, but then why do we throw so much of our lives at it and forsake other things that in the end become much more important to us? Because we are looking for some kind of status, some kind of recognition in our work. Working hard is good. We want to work hard. We want to do well. But when the curtains fall, let's hope we don't say, I let go of what really mattered because I needed to compete, to rise above, to achieve. Jesus wants to save us from that regret. He wants to save us from a life that is exhausted on trying to rise above other people. And so he gives us some solutions. Let's read on in the story we were reading before. Jesus, these disciples said, when you sit in your glorious throne, we want to sit in places of honor next to you, one on your right and the other on your left. But Jesus said to them, you don't know what you're asking. Are you able to drink from the bitter cup of suffering I am about to drink? Are you able to be baptized with the baptism of suffering I must be baptized with? Oh yes, they replied, we are able. Then Jesus told them, you will indeed drink from my bitter cup and be baptized with my baptism of suffering. But I have no right to say who will sit on my right or my left. God has prepared those places for the ones he has chosen. When the 10 other disciples heard what James and John had asked, they were indignant. Why? Because they were on the same track too. They wanted to rise above, and they didn't appreciate James and John maneuvering behind their backs. So Jesus called them together and said, you know that the rulers in this world lord it over their people, and officials flaunt their authority over those under them. But among you, it will be different. Whoever wants to be a leader among you must be your servant. And whoever wants to be first among you must be the slave of everyone else. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve others, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Jesus' antidote to a life wasted in the pursuit of recognition and status is serving others in a way that doesn't benefit you at all. Notice Jesus doesn't say that the first among you will be the one who does the most service, like whoever puts in the most hours serving other people, as if Jesus has some kind of hour meter in heaven. He's tallying it up. Whoever has the most hours of serving other people as opposed to themselves will be the first when they get to heaven. No, he says the top dog will be the servant of others. They will be the slave of all. What he's talking about is identity, how you see yourself in relation to other people. Slaves in the Roman Empire didn't dip into slavery for the weekend and then go back to being free for the rest of the week. Most of them were slaves for life, and so ambition or rising above or getting recognition wasn't really on their minds. When Jesus said the first would be the slave of all, he was saying that is how you have to see yourself. If you want to be first in my kingdom, the slave of others, slaves for life. That was how Jesus saw himself. As Pastor Sean just read, he became a slave. Jesus had laid aside any desire to compete or get recognition or gain status for himself. And so he was free to attend to the needs of others with simple affection. He saw himself as the servant of all. He said, I didn't come to be served, but to serve others. As I watch my wife pore over our little son and attend to his every need, I know that she is not thinking about gaining status for herself or gaining some kind of recognition or glory. She just loves Judah and cares for him, and it pains her to see him suffer in any way. She lays beside his crib at night and listens to his breathing. If he makes any kind of a strange noise, she jumps up and attends to his needs. If he's hungry, she nurses him. If he's uncomfortable, she holds him until he falls asleep. She happily slaves for him all day long. And she gets physically tired from that, but she doesn't grow weary emotionally. She doesn't resent him, even though she's caring for his every need all day long. When Jesus is done with us, that is how we will be, not only for our children, but for everyone around us. We will happily exhaust ourselves meeting their needs, serving them, finding our pleasure in pleasing others. Jesus said the greatest amongst us are people who have become like that. They know themselves as servants. Their souls are no longer tyrannized by this need to compete with others and rise above and see who's doing better in any way. They're free from that, and so they can just care for the needs of other people. Would you like Jesus to work on you to make you the slave of all? Because that is what he is offering. No more, no less. He's offering to make you like himself. How does Jesus get us there? How does he move us from how we see ourselves now to becoming servants and seeing ourselves as the slave of all? Through training. Through practicing service to others with no benefit to ourselves. Surprise, surprise. Jesus uses the practice of service to move us in the direction of a servant identity. That's the practice I'm putting before you today, along with Bible memorization and prayer and fasting and silence and solitude service, the rhythmic practice of service to other people. Practicing service to others as a regular rhythm of life will be used by Jesus to renovate you into his servant identity. He will use this practice to free you from the annoying need for status. I sure find it annoying myself. But if we want this to actually work, if we want to practice service in a way that actually builds this freeing identity in us, then we have to practice it in a certain way with particular goals. What are those? First, we need to serve like Jesus served. And that means serving our family first. You might say, well, wait a second there, Matt. Jesus didn't have a family. He didn't have a wife and kids, so what are you talking about? Yes, Jesus didn't have a wife and kids, but he identified his closest followers as his family, as his brothers, and he lived with them like families do. He traveled with them, he ate with them, he slept in the same homes as they slept in, he recreated with them, he took vacations with them. And his closest followers are the ones that he served first. He washed their feet. He healed them first. He listened to them first. He invested who he was in them first. Aidan W. Tozer, also known more famously as A.W. Tozer, was one of the most famous preachers, pastors, and authors of the 20th century. He authored over 40 books. Some of them are bestsellers. 2 are Christian classics on prayer and holiness. He lived a life of complete devotion to God in prayer. They said he would come into his office very early in the morning and he would spend 3 hours every day in prayer, first on the couch, then prostrate on the floor in his office. He spent time in solitude, in fasting. He was a master of contemplative spirituality. He wrote books on how you can experience God contemplatively. He preached with conviction. Many people became Christians as he traveled all over America and preached the gospel. And when he was dead and gone, and his wife remarried, she said this, "I have never been happier in my life." She remarried a guy named Leonard, and she said this, "Aidan loved Jesus Christ, but Leonard loves me." Yikes. While he was prostrate on the floor praying and traveling the country preaching, she was alone at home with their 7 children. It didn't help much that he gave most of the family money away and would not buy a car to help her because he figured that was just too materialistic. Before we succeed anywhere else for God, we have to succeed with our families first. The family is the real training ground for a servant identity and the real test of our Christ-like character. We don't necessarily get a lot of recognition and status for serving our family. We often get more of that when we're serving out in the public sphere. And so that's why serving our family first purifies our motives. I have pretty much no moral authority here because I have only one infant son and already I am struggling to serve my family. A great way to start the practice of service, an idea for how you can do this as far as a weekly rhythm, is you can set aside a couple hours, a half day, a full day, and just serve your family. If you don't have family, then it can be people that you were close to, that you're almost living rhythms of family with. Be available to your family and serve them in the way that makes them feel served. So let your wife or your kids or your best friends define what service to them looks like. That might be chores. That might just be listening to them, hanging out with them, playing with them. I had a buddy who does not live here who told me once, "I serve my family by putting overtime in at working and making more money for them." And I wondered, I don't doubt that you see it that way when you're working overtime, but I wonder if your wife feels that way about it, and if she'd like just to have you home more with her and the kids. Serve like Jesus. Serve your family first. Again, if you don't have family, serve those who you are closest to. Second, want to grow in a servant identity, we must serve to connect with Jesus. If you ask a Baptist, your typical Baptist, are you doing well in your relationship with Jesus? Are you connecting with Jesus? Then their answer to you might be something like, well, I did my devotions 4 times this week, and I listened to 2 sermons. So yeah, I'm doing pretty good. But as important as quiet times and devotions are, Jesus didn't say that that was his love language. What did he say was his love language? He said, whatever you do for the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you do for me. And what he was talking about was feeding hungry people, showing hospitality to lonely people, visiting people that were in prison or in hospital or in places like old folks' homes. That's his love language. And just as legitimate a way of connecting with him as Bible reading and prayer. We watched a little testimony from Nick. Nick's daughter, Kathy, was telling me another story. When Nick was serving, he was helping some people build a basement in their home. They'd raised it up. When they looked underneath, he found that there was a sewage problem. The sewage tank was plugged. So they took off the top of the tank, and Nick got in there with a pressure washer and sprayed out the plug in the sides of this tank. And as he was spraying, knee deep, the sewage was splashing back on him. When you serve other people, you tend to get their crap on you. People don't necessarily respond with smiles and gratitude and praise when you serve them. Sometimes they respond with no gratitude, or even worse, criticism or rejection. And it's right at those moments when we're serving people and they reject us in some way where we have a powerful opportunity to connect with Jesus. When Jesus was in heaven, before he came down here to die for us, he wasn't saying this, I'm going to go down there and I'm going to love on these people and I'm going to serve them and they are going to return all that love back to me and they're just going to praise me and welcome me and accept me. No, he said, I'm going to go down there, I'm going to serve them, I'm going to love them. They are going to reject me and I am going to be crucified for their sins. But that is exactly why the Father is sending me. We don't just connect with Jesus when service feels good and when people respond with love to our service. We can connect with him even more powerfully and more deeply when it feels terrible. That's when he is closest to us and we are breathing his air. Nick's daughter, Kathy, used to lead the youth group with her husband, Shane. She said that they took the youth group down to Mexico one year, and they went out on the streets and they were handing out food and treats for kids there and just listening to them and being with them. But those street kids didn't respond very well, and they started making fun of them. It wasn't a great experience. They came back and they did a debriefing at the end of the day. And the youth group kids said to Kathy, "This is terrible. They are treating us as servants." And Kathy was like, right, now we're getting somewhere. Richard Foster wrote this: "More than any other single way, the grace of humility is worked into our lives through the discipline of service. Nothing disciplines the inordinate desires of the flesh like service, and nothing transforms the desires of the flesh like serving in hiddenness." When nobody sees what you're doing. "The flesh whines against service, but it screams against hidden service. It strains and it pulls for honor and recognition." So that's something to think about when you're serving. Are other people seeing what you're doing? Are you getting recognition from it? Or even better, are you doing it in secrecy? The only way that this really works for us to serve like Jesus and humbly view ourselves as the servants of others and be able to get at that is that we have to first understand what Jesus did for us. Jesus said, "I didn't come for you to serve me. I came to serve you and to give my life as a ransom for yours." You and I, we are like the pirates in Julius Caesar's story, sailing the seas of family and society and taking what we can. We board other people's ships and plunder them. We hold them captive to our needs. And we've been caught and we've been hauled before God's court and found guilty and worthy of punishment. But Jesus has stepped in and said, "I will pay the ransom for you. I will give my life as a ransom for yours." He was judged and crucified instead of you. He ransomed you with his own blood. So you're his now. He owns you. The Apostle Paul says, "You have been set free from sin and have become slaves to righteousness." Every time that you get off the treadmill of self-advancement, every time that you set aside your agenda and you simply serve, especially your family, and you just listen to your spouse, or you play with your children, or you do some chores at home, you are saying to Jesus, it was enough. The ransom that you paid was enough. You came, you saw, you conquered, and so I don't need to conquer anymore. If you want to practice service this week. We got some suggestions for you on the website. You can go check those out and give you some ideas. I'll pray and the worship team could come up. Father, thank you that in making us servants, you don't want us just to do things for you, but you want us to experience the freedom of identity that Jesus had. And just being able to give ourselves, our time, our talents, our treasure to other people and experience the blessing of loving well. Lord, make us more and more like that as we lean into a rhythmic practice of service in our lives. We pray that that would be used by you to work on our identity so that we actually experience ourselves as servants and come to know ourselves as the slaves of all. That would be a great blessing. We ask you do that in us for your glory. Amen.